All right, everybody. Next up, we got to talk about life insurance contractual provisions. So I promise you it's more interesting than it sounds. But we do have to go through some specific clauses, the incontestable clause, suicide clause, grace period, and then why do we have these things? Then we'll talk about dividend options. We'll talk about what if you are in a permanent life insurance policy and you've decided you don't need it anymore. Well, you don't just forfeit those overpayments. That's created cash value. Well, what can you do with that cash value? The obvious thing is, you can decide to take cash. But there's two other options if you'd rather have term insurance to convert your cash value into term insurance, and we'll show you how that works. And then finally, we'll talk about settlement options for how death benefits are going to be paid to beneficiaries. The owner actually gets to decide that. And so there might be a situation where maybe having it paid out as a lump sum is not what I want to do. And I've got some options to do that in settlement options. We'll talk about those. Okay, so before we get started, it's important to realize you've got the owner of the life insurance policy. That's the person whose responsibility it is to continue to pay the premium. The owner can make all the changes associated with the policy. So if they want to elect a different settlement option, they can. If they want to choose to settle it for cash and to cancel the policy, they can do that. The owner is the one who gets to do that. The insured is the person whose death triggers the death benefit. So it's the person whose life is insured. Most of the time, the owner and the insured are the same person. Most of the time, right? I buy life insurance on my life. I'm the owner. I'm the insured. 95% of the time, that's how this is going. You need a reason to split up the ownership and the insured, right? Having me buy life insurance on somebody else's life creates potential moral hazard. And so there's a good reason not to do that, even if you can. For example, you can buy life insurance on your spouse, but later on, what if you split up? Do you like the idea that your spouse has life insurance on you and now they can name a different beneficiary? Maybe not. So it's usually best to have the insurance on yourself, you be the owner, you be the insured, and then you name the beneficiary to be somebody else. But it is possible that the owner and the insured can be different people. It's the owner and the beneficiary, that could happen. The beneficiary is the one who gets the death benefit. I could buy an insurance policy on my spouse and name myself as the beneficiary. I'm the owner, I'm the beneficiary. The insured and the beneficiary can't be the same person because the insured will be dead. And the idea that the beneficiary would be the person who just died doesn't seem to make sense. You can name your estate as the beneficiary, but in general, that's a bad idea. In fact, if there are no beneficiaries named, that's what will happen. If a person dies and they don't have any beneficiaries named, either because they didn't name anybody or because the beneficiary died before the insured did, then the money gets paid to the insured's estate, and it could be subject to estate taxes. That's why that's a bad idea, because beneficiaries receive death benefits free from any income tax. So if you were to run it through your estate, you're creating a level of taxation potentially that might otherwise not be there. Estate taxes are a bit more complicated than that, but that's generally the reason we say that we don't want the insured to be the beneficiary to be the estate. So the owner, what do they get to do? Well, the owner can change the beneficiary. And there's times when that makes perfect sense, but that's who gets to choose whether or not that happens. It's not necessarily the insured, right? So if my spouse's insurance owns the policy on me, I'm the insured, she's the owner, she can decide to change the beneficiary whether or not I agree. It's the owner's right to do that. The owner can choose to surrender a permanent policy for cash value. We'll find out later on that you can borrow from your life insurance policy, and the owner is the one who gets to choose to do that. If you have what's called a participating policy, it will pay dividends during times where there's favorable mortality or favorable expenses. If they do better than they expected, that will generate additional profits. If you're a participant in that, if you have a participating policy, part of those additional profits belong to you, and the way they pay them out is dividends. You'll have some choices as to how to use those dividends that we'll go through. The owner chooses what those are. Choosing how the death benefit gets paid is an ownership option. So let's say I've got my children as my beneficiaries, and I say to myself, well, the worst thing that could happen to them is to get a big, large lump sum of money because they're not really prepared for how to deal with that. Some people could, some children could. A lot of children, you'd say, well, if you're a young adult, giving you $1 million in cash might not be a really smart idea. So maybe I want to limit that. Maybe I want to say, well, that $1 million death benefit, let's pay that out over 40 years. We'll pay $25,000 a year, and then at least I can guarantee it'll last a little bit longer. That's a settlement option I could choose if I don't think that a lump sum of cash is the best. The owner is the one who gets to decide to sell the life insurance policy, assuming that there's a buyer. That's the hard part, is finding somebody who wants to buy it. You do have the right to sell your life insurance policy if you can find somebody who wants to buy it from you. Those are very specific situations. And we'll talk about some of that, where that comes up, but it's the owner who decides whether or not that's going to happen. Then we have the entire contract clause. And this one's kind of interesting because it says that this life insurance contract and the attached application, that's it. That's the contract. There's nothing else. And you might say, wow, why do you even need a clause in the contract to stipulate that? Isn't that obvious that the contract and the application, that's it? What this does is it protects the owner and the beneficiary. You bought a life insurance policy. We need to make sure that if a new company comes along and buys out the old company that you bought the policy from, they can't enact a whole bunch of changes across all of their life insurance policies. So they can't come in later and add stuff. This is the contract. This is what it is. That's it. It's the entire contract. So we're just showing that the insurance company cannot change the conditions during the term of the contract, and that's why it protects the owner. So there's actually a clause in the contract called the entire contract clause that says this is the contract, this in the application, that's all there is. Kind of interesting. Incontestable clause is kind of important. This is a limitation. So think back to when we talked about material misrepresentations, right? So when there's a material misrepresentation, somebody lies on an application, says something that's not true, and it's material, it would have changed the rates or it would have changed the decision. Normally, we say the insurance company's remedy is to void the contract entirely. The incontestable clause in life insurance puts a limit on that ability for the insurance company to void the contract. What that says is if this policy has been enforced for more than 2 years, it cannot be contested by the insurer. So you can't go back and look for mistakes or errors or flat out misrepresentations to try to get out of your obligations of paying the death benefit. Within 2 years, you can look for that. But if it's been longer than 2 years, you're stuck with this policy and you must pay the death benefit even if there has been a material misrepresentation. We do have a few exceptions, and they're very, very serious fraudulent exceptions. If the beneficiary takes out the policy with the intent to murder the insured, if that can be proven, all 50 states have what they call slayer statutes. If you kill somebody and you're a beneficiary on the life insurance contract, you won't get paid. That money will not be paid to you. It'll be paid, but just not to you. And I think everybody can understand why. That's a pretty serious thing. The applicant has somebody else take the medical exam. Yep. Then if you can prove that somebody else actually took the medical exam, that's a much higher level of fraud. And that's something that is not going to be limited by the incontestable clause. Also, if there's no insurable interest at the time of the policy inception, then if we can show that, then the incontestable clause will not limit our ability to cancel the policy to 2 years. Outside of that, whatever we find out, I mean, we said, do you smoke? You said no. It turns out that's a lie. You have been smoking the whole time. If we don't notice that for 2 years, that's too bad. The insurer is stuck with that contract. There was a really interesting case that came up where the incontestable clause was key here. And this one, if you Google Black Widow life insurance, the case will come up. But you had 2 elderly women who decided that they were going to try to run a life insurance scam. And what they did is they befriended a couple of homeless gentlemen and put them up and with housing and fed them and got them cleaned up. And all they asked in return was for them to sign some documents. Well, those documents were life insurance applications. They applied for life insurance on these 2 individuals. And then they arranged to have them killed. in separate hit and run accidents in different counties. And then they collected on the life insurance policies. And the whole scam probably would have gone undetected, except the police officers had a convention where different police officers from different areas come together and they talk about the common problems they have as being police officers. And one of them said, yeah, we've got this really weird unsolved case of a homeless man who got run down in an alley in a hit and run accident. We don't have any clues. And somebody else perked up and said, that happened in my jurisdiction too. And so they got to talking and they did a little bit more work and then fell apart immediately because, of course, the first question when somebody dies under suspicious circumstances is who stood to benefit from life insurance? Well, we've got these unrelated people with the same names, both benefiting from life insurance, huge numbers of policies, not big amounts, but they had taken out a bunch of different life insurance policies for $10,000 here and $25,000 here. Those policies are not underwritten terribly stringently because they're relatively low amounts. So the whole scheme unraveled once somebody took a little bit closer look and looked at the life insurance applications. And once they had commonalities between the cases, they had another reason to do that. Anyway, the two elderly women went to jail. I mean, it was about as evil as you get in terms of a scam. And you don't really think about elderly women as the type of people who would think to consider this sort of thing. But what they didn't realize was this no insurable interest was going to be the thing that ultimately did them in. So they ended up not collecting and they ended up going to prison for that, as you might expect would be appropriate. Anyway, otherwise, if we go 2 years and we don't discover any misrepresentations, then even if they're there after 2 years, it's too late unless it's one of these exceptions. So that's the incontestable clause. Suicide clause has some similar factors here. Remember what we had said about deliberate, intentional injuries. Those are usually excluded, right? Well, that's what suicide is in life insurance. That is an intentional injury. And so you might be thinking, okay, this is going to be excluded. And it is, but only for 2 years. So if the insured commits suicide within 2 years of the policy inception, they won't pay the death benefit, but they do have to refund all the premiums. They'll take the position that we never had a contract to begin with. If it's after 2 years, well, then we pay it just like any other claim. So yeah, intentional injuries are excluded, except after 2 years, we're going to cover it like any other claim. The thought is we're trying to protect against moral hazard here and some adverse selection for the insurance company. So yeah, there's a small group. Not very many people are going to take out a life insurance policy with the intent of taking their own life. But there are some people who are going to do that. The insurer isn't going to be able to determine who that is. So the way we do it is we say, well, if you commit suicide within 2 years, then nothing gets paid. If it's longer than 2 years, then it gets paid like any other claim. Some insurance companies actually have it down to 1 year, but the standard suicide clause is 2 years. The insurance company, if they choose not to pay because it's a suicide within the first 2 years, they have to prove that. And sometimes it's hard to prove suicide. You have a single car accident in the middle of the night. Well, nobody else was involved, and I can see an insurance company saying, wow, that was deliberate. The driver did that on purpose, trying to end their life. How do you know? Well, if they want to deny a claim, then the burden of proof is on them to show why it ought to be considered a suicide. And sometimes that's hard to do. So 2 years, again, is the critical piece. Suicide within 2 years is not paid. Premiums are refunded. Suicide after 2 years is a death just like any other death, and we'll pay. There's actually a grace period built in to a life insurance policy saying you can be late on a premium without the policy lapsing. Usually 30 days is what you're looking at. Sometimes 60 days for some of the flexible premium products. But the whole idea is it's not good for the insurance company to have policies lapse, right? They only make money when policies stay in force and then people survive. That's what they want. So it's not a good thing for them when policies lapse because people forget to pay. So if you're late on your premium, you don't have to prove that you're still insurable. You don't have to do anything. Just get that premium payment in before the grace period expires, and that's no problem. What happens if you die before the grace period expires? Well, what they'll do, this is kind of neat, they'll actually just deduct the overdue premium from the death benefit. So they won't say, oh, no, you're late. That means your policy is lapsed and we don't have to pay. they'll pay and they'll deduct the overdue premium if you die within the grace period. A rare situation. But that's possible there. So that's kind of neat. It's actually built into the life insurance policy. Most property policies don't have that. Auto insurance, if you're late on your premium payment, you're not covered. And that's a problem. So life insurance, at least we have a little bit of an extension on that. There's no real good way to take advantage of that. I mean, the only thing you could do is, usually we're talking 30 days. You could delay your payment by 30 days. That isn't, hugely beneficial, and it's not something you can repeat. If you did it once and then you continued to do it every single year, you still only get the time value of money benefit once. So it's not like you can take advantage. It's just something that's built in there as something that's kind of nice for a policyholder. And again, the idea is the insurance company does not benefit from the lapsing of premium payments, from the lapsing of policies. That doesn't help me. As an insurance company, I want people to continue to pay premium. I want them to continue to survive. That's how we come out ahead. If you go beyond the grace period, then we're looking at reinstatement. And the reinstatement clause says that you can reinstate a policy that has lapsed. Grace period's expired and you didn't pay the premium. You can get back in as long as you can pay the overdue premiums with interest. So maybe this has been lapsed for a couple of years and you want to get back in. You've got to prove that you're still insurable. So really your choice here, if you're still insurable, is, do you want to get back into your old policy, or do you want to just go out and buy a brand new life insurance policy? If you're insurable, you could do either of those things. So the question becomes, why would you be willing to pay overdue premiums if you could just go out and get a new policy? By the way, once you surrender for cash value, that's it. You can't reinstate back into that policy. So if you surrendered, that's the end. Then you'd have to go out and buy a new policy. But otherwise, you have a choice. You could buy a new policy or you could reinstate your old one. Why would you consider reinstating your old one? Well, you won't have to pay a new commission. That's true. And commissions on permanent life insurance policies are big. You don't pay it directly, you pay it through the cost of the premium, but it's common for the 100% of the first year premium, that's the commission. So if you're buying a new policy, well, that's going to be built into the pricing of your policy. You've already paid that in your old policy. Might make it better to get into that old policy. Plus your old policy has a lower premium because you bought it when you were younger, right? If you're going to buy a new one, well, now we're going to use your older age, and that's going to increase the price. So if this is a policy you had for a long time and then you let it lapse, you might be better off getting back into it because maybe the premiums were calculated when you were 10 years younger. That could be. Whatever cash value you've got and whatever accumulated dividends you've got, if you have any, those will be higher under a previously established policy. If you buy a new policy, you start from scratch. There won't be any new suicide or incontestability period under the old policy. You've already satisfied that. Again, that's probably not a reason to reinstate, but among other reasons, it's something maybe that deserves consideration. It's possible that your old policy had better conditions. One of them would be interest rates on loans that you take from cash value in a policy. But it really is going to come down to how much lower is the premium to reinstate, and then how many overdue premiums do you have to pay? If we're only talking about one, then it might be better to reinstate. You're not missing out on a whole lot. But if you've missed 10 years worth of premium payments, you're probably better off to buy a brand new insurance policy so you don't have to back pay 10 years worth of premium payments. That's extreme. Most of the time, this is limited to 5 years anyway. But reinstating is something you can do even if your policy has lapsed. So it's an option, something to consider, rather than just immediately assuming that you must buy a brand new life insurance policy. We'll talk about misstatement of age or sex real quick here. So misstatement of age or sex is a material misrepresentation, right? And what's going to happen is if we discover this while you're still alive, then it's a little bit easier. We can send you a note that says, hey, you've been paying the wrong premiums. Either pay the right premium or we have to adjust your death benefit to reflect what you've really been paying for. If a person dies and then we figure it out, then we adjust the death benefit. And it's a simple formula that we use. Let me go ahead and type this out here. Let me go ahead and get us a document. So I can show you this misstatement of age or sex. I'm trying to move that out of the way. So misstatement of age or sex, the way that works is this. Okay, so we take the amount paid, we divide it by the correct amount, what should have been paid, and then we multiply that times the death benefit. That's how we adjust the death benefit. So it's just a percentage. So let's say I was supposed to be paying $10 a month, and I said that instead of being 33, I said I was 32. Well, is that going to result in me underpaying or overpaying? Yeah, I'm underpaying. If I said I was 32, but I'm actually 33, that means I'm underpaying. Younger people pay less in life insurance premiums. Let's say I was paying $9 instead of $10, and my death benefit is $100,000. Then we're taking 90% of $100,000. That has to be given to you. That's a number I came up with, and that means that the death benefit, instead of being $100,000, will actually be $90,000 that's paid to my beneficiary. Again, if we figure this out while I'm still alive, they'll send me a note and they'll say, look, you've been underpaying us by $1 a month. Make that premium payment up if you want your death benefit to stay at $100,000, or go ahead and continue to pay what you have been paying, but be aware that your death benefit is going to be adjusted. So what ends up happening is these small changes have huge impacts on how we adjust the death benefit because of the misrepresentation of age or sex. Most of the time that's not deliberate. Most of the time that's going to be a clerical error of some sort. Nobody's going in with the idea that, I'm going to, deliberately misrepresent what I pay, because once they discover it, they're going to correct for it on the death benefit side. And as you can see, it's a significant correction. So that's how we do it. Mostly clerical errors are resulting in this. Nobody's going to, and it works the other way too. If you're paying too much, then they'll adjust the death benefit upward. This isn't a one-way thing. If it's wrong, it needs to be corrected. It's got to be right. So if you've been overpaying, then yeah, your death benefit would be adjusted upward, and that's okay. You can't really game this. You can't say, well, I'm going to tell them I'm 40, even though I'm going to tell them I'm an age that requires double the premium payment, and I'm going to pay $20 when I should only be paying $10. If you're willing to do that, you might as well just get double the death benefit up front and tell them your intention, because then you don't have to rely on somebody else catching a mistake. Life insurance is pretty much linear. If you want $100,000, it'll cost X, and if you want $200,000, it's basically going to cost 2X, because all of our losses are total losses. So the pricing curve isn't like it is for property insurance or for liability insurance, where you can get huge amounts for very, very cheap. That doesn't happen with life insurance. It's pretty linear. If you want double the life insurance, it probably is going to cost you double the premium. Okay, as far as time goes, that's a good place to pick up, to stop for this one, and we'll pick up with beneficiary designation on the next one. Thanks, you guys. If anything's unclear, send me an email and I'll do my best to clarify. We'll go from